What is happening, everyone? Tyler Pyburn here from the Pulse Network, talking with FF Champs and Bill Enright. And Bill, let's take a look at some of the fantasy news as far as some of the injury status. Obviously, the biggest one that everybody's really been paying attention to happens to be Adrian Peterson. It was always almost everyone's #1 overall pick, but we saw what happened at the end of the season. A lot of fantasy owners just gulp, big old gasp.
Yeah, what an awful timing for this injury. He tore his ACL in Week 16, which is basically the Super Bowl for a lot of fantasy football leagues out there. The typical recovery for an ACL injury is about a year. So it happened in Week 16. He already began running in late March. Now, we're not really excited about that news because running and playing football are two totally different things. But the Vikings medical staff says that he's on schedule in terms of his rehab process, and they're hopeful that he'll be 100% healthy for Week 1. If he's not, that's great news for Toby Gerhart because you can grab him late, and he's going to get a lot of carries early on in the season. Even if Peterson's ready to go Week 1, they're not going to just throw him out there and give him the 25 carries that we're accustomed to seeing Peterson get. So Toby Gerhart's a guy you'll definitely want to keep an eye on in the upcoming drafts, and keep an eye on Peterson's health because that'll determine how much of an increase Gerhart's stock will get.
All right, but talk about Peterson, though. What am I supposed to do? I had him last year. What am I supposed to do as far as coming draft day? Do I look at him? If they say he's ready for Week 1, I just don't know what to do.
Well, we're not going to draft him as the #1 running back anymore. He's probably not in the top 5. I'm not sure if he'll be in the top 10 because the thing about the ACL is I don't think there's any way that he'll be 100% ready to go in terms of Week 1. There were some rumors that he'd start off the season on the PUP list, which means that he wouldn't be able to play in the first 8 games of the year anyway. I doubt the Vikings will do that because he's too important for that offense. He's really what makes that offense move up and down the field. But if you're going to draft Adrian Peterson, you just have to make sure, and we'll see in training camp and hopefully the preseason, how healthy he's going to be. That'll really determine what round you'll be taking Peterson in.
All right, let's go ahead and let's move on to Jamaal Charles. I mean, he's a guy that I really haven't been hearing too much about as far as his injury status. What are you hearing?
Yeah, he tore his left ACL in Week 2. It's been 7 months since the injury. So if you compare Charles and Peterson, same injury, but because Charles got injured so much earlier in the year, he's already making a lot more progress in terms of getting back on the field. He says he might be able to participate in OTAs. We're not sure if that's going to happen. He also says that he's ahead of schedule, but whenever a player comes out and says that they're ahead of schedule or that they're going to be 100%, I don't really listen a whole lot. That's like my girlfriend saying there's a sale at Bloomingdale's this weekend. You know, you don't really know if it's true
until you get the credit card bill. He's excited to have
Peyton Hillis as a teammate. Like the Chiefs are going to run that zone blocking scheme, which should open a lot of holes for Jamaal Charles. So expect to get him to get some yardage in bunches in 2012. Whether or not he'll be 100% healthy for Week 1, still uncertain. But Jamaal Charles is much more likely to rebound from the injury than Adrian Peterson is, just because he got hurt earlier in the season.
I was going to say he's got about 6, 7, 8 more weeks on him than Peterson does.
Yeah.
So that's definitely 2 months is a big thing when it comes to the ACL. Now let's move on. Let's talk about Kenny Britt. Now Britt's one of those guys people will look to, but I always find it interesting because he can also affect other guys as well.
Right. We saw what happened with Chris Johnson last year. He didn't do diddly squat in terms of running the football, and that was because the Titans didn't really have a big passing threat. Week 1, Kenny Britt had 136 yards and 2 touchdowns. Week 2, Kenny Britt had 135 yards and a touchdowns. Week 3, tore his ACL. He was on pace to surpass Calvin Johnson as the #1 receiving player last year, but he only played in 2 games, so there's really not much to go on. And we don't know if that trend would have kept going. But he did look really good when he was on the field. The thing about the Titans is we don't know who's going to play quarterback. Is it going to be Jake Locker? Is it going to be Matt Hasselbeck? Regardless, Kenny Britt is on the field. He is going to be the #1 option in that Titans passing attack. And if it's any indication what he did for only those 2 games last year, we're really excited about him making a big rebound in 2012.
All right, what am I doing as far as the draft goes? What am I looking at him for?
You know, he's not going to go as a top 15 wide receiver because the wide receiver pool in the NFL is just so deep. But he is a guy that if you get late, maybe 5th, 6th, 7th round, he can end up being one of the biggest steals of the draft just because he has so much potential, if healthy, when on the field.
All right, let's move on. Let's talk about Fred Jackson. Give me your thoughts and give me his status right now.
Fractured his fibula in Week 10. We saw C.J. Spiller come in those final 6 games. Fred Jackson was like a top 3 running back through the first 10 games of the season, but as soon as he left the field, C.J. Spiller came right in and did a great job as his backup. So Fred Jackson, he started to run a little bit. It's not like an ACL injury where you're worrying about being able to cut. It was a broken bone. So those heal. It'll be a lot better in terms of his healing process. But the thing is, C.J. Spiller did such a good job. We don't know who the starter is going to be. Spiller or Fred Jackson. It's probably going to be a timeshare up there in Buffalo. So if you're expecting Fred Jackson to reinsert himself as a top fantasy option, you're going to have to think again, because now Spiller has emerged as a capable runner for the Bills.
All right, the last guy we have to touch upon happens to be Rob Gronkowski, and obviously we saw him play in the Super Bowl. It looks like his injury was much worse than what was originally led on to. We saw him in the walking boot afterwards, dancing up on stage.
Yeah.
But is he going to be back for the season, at the start of the season?
Yep, he had off-season surgery on that ankle. It's amazing that he was able to play all in the regular season, all through the playoffs, and even in the Super Bowl with that injured ankle. He's still in a walking boot, but that hasn't stopped him from partying on spring break at all. And I can't say I blame him, because if I was in a walking boot and I was Rob Gronkowski, I'd be partying probably 23 out of 24 hours out of the day. He is going for that Madden cover. If he gets that Madden cover, I'm very, very, very superstitious when it comes to curses. I'm trying to avoid voting for him in the Madden cover because I want to see him back on the field. If he's healthy, and there's no reason why he shouldn't be come September, he's going to be a top 15 pick. He led the league last year, better than Calvin Johnson. I believe it was 17 touchdowns, over 1,300 yards, 90 receptions. Without a doubt, Rob Gronkowski will be a top 15 pick in 2012. He's just that dominant on the field.
He is Billy Enright of FF Champs. I'm Tyler Papert of the Pulse Network. This has been your Injury Status Update.